you've already got the screen share, and you've got plenty of time. So why don't you go right ahead, John, and take it over.
So I'm going to preface this by saying I actually had more slides, but then I saw Dr. Khan's note about keeping it short, so I cut a few out. And then after my email conversation with Dr. Schneider and Dr. Joffrey yesterday, the scope of my proposal changed a bit. So I cut out those slides too. So hopefully I didn't cut out too much, but I think I've got enough that I can share tonight. And the general concept is still the same from what I submitted in my 1 to 2 pager, but the scope and the breadth of it has changed a bit because both Drs. Schneider and Joffrey thought that might be a bit too much to get through in one semester. So yeah, it's fine. So what I plan on doing is doing a data visualization. Infographics and visual communication was something that actually drew me to the IDT program. So it was something that I thought would be fitting to do as a capstone project. And there are possibilities where I work that could potentially become a new career path for me after some discussions with my manager, and I'm using my employee scholarship program to attend, so they're interested in seeing some return on investment in this. So I thought this would be a fitting capstone. So what I want to do is a data visualization based on some research I did last semester in Dr. Sam's research methods class. Originally, I was thinking of doing something with social media and how we've used social media over the past 3 or 4 elections. That scope has since changed a bit in order to narrow it down a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm still going to make use of one of the resources that I found last semester, but instead of focusing exclusively on just how we use social media in this context, I'm going to kind of do a before and after visualization on Trump. So one half of the visualization would be him as a candidate, and that's using the data that I found last semester. There's a research paper that was published by Columbia University, or by their scholarly journal, where the researchers did a Twitter sentiment analysis, and they were able to determine by each state the percentages of positive and negative sentiments expressed on Twitter about Trump and about Clinton. And then also they were able to measure the campaign issues that were discussed, and then broke them down by state that each candidate won. So what I thought I would do is I would use that as the candidate side of the infographic, and then the presidential side, with it just coming around to his first year in office, there is a lot of information out available on his approval ratings, how he's done with his campaign promises. So I could take that data that I've been finding online on different news sites and then compare it to the data I found for him as a candidate. So for example, his approval ratings were quite high, or not his approval ratings, but his positive sentiments were quite high in certain states prior to the election. Well, how does that compare to his approval ratings in those same states? And the same can be said for the campaign promises. I found a really neat site, or an interactive infographic that I think I can make use of from the Washington Post's website, where it tracks his promise status. And it ranks each one of his campaign promises, and those tie back to the issues that were discussed in that research paper from him as a candidate. So again, I have the before and the after information that I can compare. What I originally was thinking of doing was doing 2 infographics, one a static one, and then the other an interactive visualization using the same data sets. And my theory was I wanted to see which one was more effective. and more engaging. And I had a Likert scale that I was going to use with my usability group to find out, which design that I created was more effective and more engaging. But that's where the project has changed a little bit. Both Dr. Schneider and Dr. Joffrey thought that was a great idea, but too much to handle in the one semester. And actually, last semester, when Dr. Stam was helping me with this idea, she thought the same thing and said, "Well, you did a static infographic in IDT 590. Why don't you do something different? Have you ever done an interactive one?" I said, "No." So here's an opportunity for me to learn some new skills, learn a new tool, and take what I learned in IDT 534 and IDT 590 and apply those to an interactive format. So that's where I am right now. In terms of gathering the usability information, I would use the same process I used in IDT 590, which was to take the infographic, pair it up with a survey that I created in SurveyMonkey, which actually was based on a Likert scale that I created, and then measure the infographic based on the feedback I get. So that's the nuts and bolts to it. Some theories and methodologies that I had planned to follow when I was going with a two-stage project. I pulled some from Universal Principles of Design that I thought would apply to both settings, a static infographic and an interactive one. And my test was to see how well could I take it from the static environment to the digital interactive online environment following these methodologies.
Okay.
The overall process that I would use for either one of the infographics, and if I'm only going to do the interactive one, I think I can still use this process. And this came from the course of study from IDT 590. It was Alberto Cairo's method on how to develop an infographic or a piece of functional art. And they're very basic steps. I can still follow them for the interactive version. So that's basically where I am right now. I'm going back and forth through the conversation I had with Dr. Joffrey to get some ideas of how to reframe this, and what kind of principles do I want to frame this project around. So I'm probably going to have to lean on her and Dr. Schneider and Dr. Kahn, you as well, to kind of figure out how to frame this best. But that's what I want to do. That's what I'd like to do. Yeah, so that's what I have.
Yeah, good. I wanted to ask you real quickly, I mean, what are your metrics? I'm not quite clear how you define like a Twitter feed in terms of a sort of variable. How do you measure it, I guess?
Well, yeah, so that work was already done by this the two people who wrote the research paper that I found last semester. So what they did in their paper, they described their process of how they scraped Twitter for a certain time period. I'm drawing a blank on the actual range, but it led up to the general election on how they scraped Twitter for tweets that mentioned Clinton or Trump and measured the different ways to rate the sentiments. I see Dr. Utsala, you have your hand up.
I was curious as to that data. Has that data been analyzed for which accounts were real accounts and which accounts were bot accounts? Like, have you taken a look at Hamilton's 68?
No, I was just relying on the information that they published from their study.
Right.
I can share that paper.
Right. Well, I mean, I know there's this website which they're doing their best to track which accounts are possibly part of the Russian bot network.
Right.
And as we know, there's a large number of remote controlled accounts trying to sway the use of hashtags and what have you. So I'm a little bit curious as to how you can, I don't know, like I don't think, like, do you have access to enough data that you can actually try and sanitize it and try to get at real users as opposed to fake actors?
Right. Yeah, I don't think I can. It's information that these two people published. One is a professor at I'm drawing a blank on the university he teaches at, and I think it was one of his students. The two of them published this paper. It just happened to be published through Columbia University's undergraduate journal.
Yeah, but I mean, I would take a look at the dates when he published it and maybe even contact the publisher themselves and see if they have any updates to their database.
It was published in spring of 2017, so it's a fairly recent. It was done post-election. Because what they also did is they took the electoral revote. So what they did is they gathered these tweets. They measured the sentiments for positive and negative sentiments, and then they predicted how each state would vote.
Right.
And then they ran their own quote unquote Twitter predictions, and then they compared that to the actual electoral college results to see, how did their predictions line up with the actual outcome of the election. So
it might be interesting to then, if there is some sort of way to analyze how many percentage of how many they were bots, or like to show the influence that these networks had on the opinions of those on those states. But I don't know if that's even feasible with the data sets you have.
I can reach out to them. I actually was in touch with the professor over the at the end of the fall semester. I just wanted to reach out to him to say, hey, this is what I'm proposing to do for my thesis. Do I have your permission to use your data? And he said, oh, sure, go ahead. Just make sure you cite it properly. So I've already established that contact. I can certainly reach out to him again and just ask that question, because I think he left it open that if I had any questions, to feel free to reach out.
But John, I had a different question, John. That
Sure.
And here, I mean, maybe I can just or you can bring up the article. I was curious to see how you were going to use the data in their article. Like, what exactly were you thinking of doing with it? Because I presume that their data that they published in their tables is what you want to use as your raw data.
Correct. So what I planned on doing is creating a choropleth map that that shows, using color codes, the degree to which the sentiment was positive versus negative. I can show the total number of tweets, and then if a state was more positive toward Trump, it would be a darker red. If it was less positive toward him, it would shade from red to blue. The tool that I think I forgot to mention this. The tool that I plan on using is Tableau.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a data visualization tool that's geared for people like me that don't really have a strong coding background, but have ideas on how to do data visualization. So it's kind of a WYSIWYG environment, but it's quite powerful. And one of the things that it can do is you can bring your data into like an Excel table and link that into Tableau, and then it will kind of guide you through as to which visualizations to use based on that data.
So I just put the link to the article that you cited. I think this is the one you're talking about. And I think if you maybe brought that up and
Sure.
just showed us that would help Russ and Eve sort of have a different understanding of what you're doing. Because Eve, I mean, I get your question. It's pretty reasonable, but I don't think that's what John's trying to do.
Yeah, give me a second here. Let me navigate to where I've got all the articles.
You mentioned a Washington Post article too that you were going to use.
Yep, I can bring that up as well.
I mean, I understand that he wants to see the influence by comparing it to the actual votes, which
He wants to visualize the influence. He doesn't want
yeah,
to.
you want to visualize exactly. Yeah.
Right. So let me scroll down a little more.
Yeah, that's the table that exactly.
Yeah. So what they did here, this is for lack of better terms, their data dump. And what they have here are the total number of tweets per candidate, the outcome of how they measured whether it's positive or negative per each candidate. Then the Twitter results column is what they did their Twitter prediction on. Okay, well, based on the difference between the positive and negative sentiments, Alabama should go to Trump, and that was their Twitter prediction. And lo and behold, that's how Alabama voted. They voted for Trump. Anything in blue, you can see where the discrepancies were. For example, Maryland was forecasted to go to Trump, but Clinton actually won it.
And I think you're talking about anything in gold in the last column is a discrepancy between the prediction and the Electoral College, right?
Right. Yep. So the very last column really breaks the discrepancies down.
And so effectively, what I understand you want to do is you want to turn this table you want to visualize this table differently.
Yeah, so give me a second. I may have a screenshot of what I was playing around with.
Now, are you planning to do any other analysis based on that data?
Yeah. Let me go back to the data. So I'm planning. This was the primary piece that I was going to use.
Right.
And if I scroll down a little more, they've done some other measurements where they can take the population of each state and the total tweets that came out of each state. Now they've already done the graph here, but you can get kind of plotting of state population to tweet count. I thought that was interesting, but I don't know if I'm going to use it. What I thought was more interesting.
Do they have any? I'm a little bit curious as if they had any retweet data.
I believe they talked about retweets, and I'm not sure how they handled it. I'd have to search for it, and I could answer that question for you.
Right, because I mean, you said they analyzed whether the tweets were negative or positive, or
right? And in this paper here, they listed their criteria of how they determined whether it was positive or negative, and then they also talked about the nuances of sarcasm and how that might have influenced their results using or influence the outcome of their algorithms that they created.
Not to promote my own stuff, but I did do my thesis was on positive and negative replies on a forum, and I'm wondering if the negative tweets got more retweets than the positive ones, and if there's a better correlation between the amount of negative tweets and whether they won the Electoral College or not. But I mean, that just
help John, though. How does that help John?
It doesn't really. No, I agree. I'm thinking out loud.
Okay. No, I agree. I mean, I think those are all. I'd love to see all those questions answered, and I'd love to pick apart their data. I'm not sure that I have issues with this paper, but as a data source for John to make a graphic, which is really what his project's about.
Right.
That's what we should focus on, I think.
Yeah. So let me jump back to OneNote here.
But that table that you're showing, table 4.
Yep. Let me go back to that. Okay.
So effectively, you can add those columns to table 1, and you just have more columns.
Right. So what I'm going to probably end up doing with table 4 is that will be what I use to measure his campaign promises against, using the information from the Washington Post that I found over the weekend. The campaign topics that go across the top of this table here match almost perfectly to what the Washington Post had in their tool, and it shows what status some of his campaign promises are, whether it's been launched, whether it was a success, whether it's stalled, whether it's in some other state.
The trouble, I've been thinking about that. all of this data is state level. So the units of analysis on this data from this article are states, and the Washington Post data is not state level data.
Right.
So I don't really see how that data helps you if it's not based on, I mean, your whole graphic is going to be structured on having 50 states. So I presume there's some map or something, but well, I mean, it's all based on these 50 states, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So unless you have other data that has 51 states, it's going to be kind of, it's like a totally different project, which would be fine, but that would be like, there's no connection between the two that I see.
I hadn't thought of that.
Do they total this at the bottom? I mean, you could create the totals if you wanted to, but.
Yeah, I could tabulate that up.
You could, but that's like, I think that's a bit of a distraction in some ways from your core thing, which is that basically you're saying that as a visual artist, information designer, you're going to take this really this spreadsheet table, 51 rows of data, and I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 plus 15 in the first one and 27 columns, and you're going to make something that we can get. Right. And to make something that we can get and understand without having to paw through those numbers, that's your contribution to the science.
Correct. Yep.
The authors of this are hopefully going to say, whoa, that's really cool. I see patterns in my data I didn't see. I mean, that's but you're not going to critique their data necessarily, or
I'm taking their data.
That's a given. You're starting there. That's like fixed, and so you don't mess with it in a sense. So yeah, I mean, I might pass on the post data myself, because I think that really, you got all sorts of complications. Now you've got two different data sources coming at you, and you have to reconcile them in your text, and just focus on one.
Okay.
One of the things that's interesting is that they were wrong a lot of the time in terms of predicting it, and it would be really neat if your visualization, your infographic, sort of helped us understand that, why it was wrong so often and what it may have missed, and also, I don't want to go back to the retweeting, because I guess that's additional information you don't have right now. But it's sort of the whole idea, what Steve touched on, is we want to gain insight by looking at this. It shouldn't just be a pretty picture. It should be, oh, I see. Now I understand why their predictions were off, or I can understand why he won. I can sort of see what was going on. So, always think of that, what are you providing? What value added are you getting us by creating this interactive graphic? And I think it'll be there, but make sure that you're thinking about that, because sometimes we do just get pretty pictures from students, and I really need to work with them on these things, because the infographic is meant to give us insights and analysis that we didn't have before.
If I may ask, how is the infographic going to be interactive? Sorry.
So that's what I was going to pull up in OneNote. I think I had a screenshot of what I was playing around with. Oh, that's my draft. Where did I? That's an old one. Well, tell you what, I will just fire up Tableau and show you what I have so far. Oh boy, I got a lot of things up there.
Well, if I can just talk while you're loading up here, have you seen the Hans Rosling TED Talk?
No. Which one was that again?
I think it's Hans Rosling. It's one of the more famous TED Talks where he does a visualization of GDP and life expectancy and of all the countries in the world. And the thing he's famous for is doing are these bubble charts where you can see 3 axes of data simultaneously.
Oh, I think I have. I think Professor Salmon had us watch that in 590.
Okay.
Sounds familiar. Somebody had us in one of the classes that I'd been in, had us watch.
Okay. Well, what I was thinking as a potential interaction for your infographic was to be able to break it down, I know Steve said like it might be interesting to see it on a national level and then break it down by state. If you could have the national level data and then you click on it and it would break apart into all 50 states, and then you can go into individual states and see the relationship in that state. And
Yeah, so one of the things, so I'm still, I found this program late October, early November, I think is about when I stumbled across Tableau. So I've been playing around with it since then and getting a little more proficient with some of the basics as I go along. When I last was playing around with it, I was getting the hang of how to do the choropleth maps, and at that time I was still going to do some type of comparison between the Clinton side of that table and the Trump side of that table. This one is just the Twitter predictions. So what I was just trying to get a feel for was how do I do that if I want to shade the different states certain colors and degrees. So I was just trying to do it simply.
Just so I get on that one, blue is wrong and red is right, correct?
Right. So if I go to the one where I pulled in the Trump tweets and looked at positive and negative sentiments, let me zoom in a little bit here. So now you see a few different shades of color, and obviously the red states are the ones that they predicted Trump would win, and Trump actually did win. And then I included the percentages in there. The blue states are the ones that Clinton won, and then the ones in gray, or I'm sorry, orangish here, are the ones that I lost my train of thought. These are the states that look like, I'm sorry, the Zoom thing is right in my way here. Had a higher negative percentage of sentiment expressed for Trump, but I think he went ahead and won these states.
Yeah, but I get the point. I mean, I think this is really helpful to see.
And then what I can do from this data is I can filter it out into other types of visualizations, whether it's a bar graph, a line graph. That's what I was thinking about trying to do with the percentages of the campaign issues.
Mm-hmm.
Pull that into a different type of visualization from this choropleth map. That's the kind of the working thing that I've had in my head right now. And then over the weekend, I found the other information regarding approval ratings and actual statuses of the campaign promises. So I've kind of been bouncing around those ideas yet. I haven't had a chance to go back and try to.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting stuff not to do as a separate. You could do a project if you're going to do 2 or 3, if you're going to do different data sets and use the same technique to visualize different data sets. I usually would want you to do 3, not 2, because 2 is too few to make any decent comparisons. Right. So you put the Washington Post data is one set of data, the one that you've discovered already with the tweets is a second, and then you'd need a third. And you might use similar kinds of techniques to show how your technique is useful across different kinds of data.
Yeah, so a third data set that I had was actually a few articles about his approval ratings across the country. And so the Washington Post would help me with the campaign promises status. The Gallup News pieces handled the approval ratings, and then the research paper that I just had up was my initial data set. So I think I've got 3 that I can work from.
The other 2 that don't have state level data though, right?
One of them does. One of the approval ratings does break it down by state.
Yeah. So because I mean that's sort of what would keep the data sets consistent and allow your comparisons to have some, you know, some merit. One thing that I think about here on the maps is maps are really useful, especially this particular map, which shows states as they exist with their existing borders. If you're trying to make an argument that has something to do with geography, if you don't, and it's just coincidence or something else about why states that are red happen to be close to each other, and like if there's something going on in New England, if you don't have something going on geographically, then maybe the map isn't the right metric. So you have, you know, unless you're trying to tell a geographic story.
Yeah, actually, that first research paper did break things down geographically. I just wanted to start somewhere to start playing around.
It's a great place to start, but you get locked into thinking that you're seeing something that's really not there, especially with the map of the U.S. and especially using states, because the relative size of states relative to their population is very misleading. You know, especially you zoomed out and we have a huge red block up there for Alaska, but it doesn't make it bigger or more important. There's a whole nother set of maps that might be fun to play with that represent the U.S. states based on their size of population.
Oh yeah. I think there's ways that I can play around with that in Tableau. I've seen that somewhere.
But you need another base. This is obviously a base of U.S. states with real geographies, but there's probably a Tableau template or something that represents U.S. states in terms of the size of their population. I've seen it done with squares. You might poke around and look at the Electoral College maps where they give each state a square for an electoral vote. And then, then it's representative of the population, which is intriguing. So the number of red would actually represent something other than these random state boundaries. And you might then be able to make some arguments. There may be geographic arguments. There may be reasons, and so you might want to explain what you're seeing, and that would be interesting. You could just raise this in your conclusions that based on your reanalysis of their data, these are questions they didn't ask. Like, is there something going on with the South because of internet penetration? Is there something going on in the Pacific Northwest where, home to Microsoft and Amazon and the high-tech corridors? There's something, you know what I mean? So geography might be meaningful, and you wouldn't have to do the analysis, but you could just say that your visualization allows you to ask these additional questions that they could have analyzed, and that the next IDT student can choose to do that.
Right. Okay.
So, and just before you get hooked into the maps, make sure that the maps are useful to you.
Yeah, I just wanted something to start with.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, John, if you still have the CATS book, I think that was 534. They on page, he deals with exactly this issue on page 96, and he shows different maps depending on the size of the states. He also sort of breaks up the country by little pie charts, and the pie charts represent how many votes someone got versus,
okay.
And the nice thing about it is now you may actually get some insight, because you'd see, well, they just won this state by a narrow margin, Michigan maybe, and they were wrong. So I see the close states they tend to miss, because those are a little harder to predict. I don't know. But I mean, right. The idea to be able to show more than just won or lost is a tricky thing, because they may have lost one by 3,000 votes, and they may have lost another by 3 million votes. So you're not seeing that with just red and blue. So,
well, he doesn't have. That's not part of this data set. The state votes. He only uses Electoral College votes.
Well, but he does have percentages there. Let's see.
Those are based on percentage of tweets.
Okay, but at least you might be able to learn something about, did they get 80% of the tweets, or did they get 20%.
Yeah, so the percentages would be based on not the popular vote, but on the tweet, the sentiment.
Right.
Because I mean, you can do it. I'm just trying to encourage you not to bring in additional data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
No,
you could bring in the popular vote for each state if you wanted to, but then you're no longer doing a reanalysis. Then you're saying, "Wow, they didn't do enough data work, so I'm going to do more." And
I was thinking about bringing in the popular vote counts. I have it, but
yeah, you could. I mean, that would be certainly something you could do. But then you're really saying that this article is interesting, but it's wrong because they didn't use the right data. And if they'd used popular vote instead of electoral college vote, some of those, I bet you if you did popular vote instead of electoral, some of those greens would be yellow and some of those yellows would be green.
right. And they even say
Totally different study.
They even say in their conclusion that one of the factors is people can talk all they want about a certain candidate one way or the other on Twitter, but then they go out and vote a completely different way. And not everybody that lives in a state has a Twitter account. So there were all those people that might have been the swing, the quote unquote swing voters in those states to make a state go from red to blue.
Then you're no longer doing a visualization of this paper. Then you're doing a visualization of this paper with some additional data that they should have included, and this is why their initial conclusions were wrong. But I'd encourage you not to do that because you're interested in visualization in your project, not so much Twitter sentiment. You don't really care in a sense about you care about the process of visualization, not about, and can you learn something from your visualization, not whether or not Twitter sentiment analysis is helpful. You know what I mean? It's like, so I just want to, I think you want to keep your focus on the visualization and not get sucked into politics, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be fascinating if you did, and it would be great if you wanted to do that. It's a cool data set to build on. That would be great, but I also want you to graduate.
Yeah. Another thing to look into would be in the 5 hat racks in your principles of design for inspiration as to how to organize the information for your visualization, because that's going to be key to your thing. Is how do you make this understandable and how do you organize it? And the 5 hat racks are the 5 ways you can organize data.
Okay, I'll look for that one. Thank you.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of this is what are you really analyzing, and once you get that nailed, then you can move forward. I mean, are you sort of, it looks like from what you showed me, you're analyzing predictions against whether they actually won or lost, and also what the Twitter results, how that compared to that. So that's fine. But I mean, I do think your research question is central. And
yeah, so originally my thought was I would have 2 sides to the visualization. One would be Trump and one would be Clinton, and show Clinton's side of this data set. But then I didn't know if that would be the right direction to go in, so that I thought, well, Trump won, so he's president. Let me just focus on him. And then I was thinking, well, what could I do to augment this? And that's where I got the idea of including the approval ratings, because it's just been in the news so much lately, especially with his first year in office coming around.
Can I go back, though, before you go there? What's your research question?
Well, that's the thing. So it's changed a bit. Originally, my original research question was how effective, which type of infographic is more effective? Is it a static or is it an interactive? And that was based on another research paper that I'd found.
What's your research question now?
That's what I'm trying to revamp. That was one of the things that after our discussion yesterday with Dr. Joffrey and yourself, Dr. Schneider, I need to come up with a new research question. So that was one of the slides that got removed from my deck.
I bet you your research question doesn't have the word Trump or Clinton or approval or Twitter in it.
No, it didn't.
And it shouldn't. So that's why you don't have to, then it's not about that. It's your research question is, how does a information visualization built in Tableau enhance the understanding of this table. So your final project should start with this table and then show us your visualization. And then the question is, do we know more? So we're looking at this first, and that's interesting. That's like complicated to understand, but it's not terribly difficult. I mean, it kind of tells a message. The question is, can you tell a different, better, faster, more interesting message with what you're going to do with that? That's your question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that interactivity is a key issue there too. Is that going to be something valuable, or is it just taking up too much of your time? I mean,
So that's actually a very interesting point, because one of the things that Dr. Joffrey said in her initial message is there's a lot of recent research out there that's kind of debunking the value of interactive infographics, and she added the caveat saying, I'm actually a proponent of interactive infographics, as that was something that I did for a living. This is what she was telling me in her email before she joined the faculty at SUNY Poly. So she's very much a proponent of, from what I'm gathering, of interactivity. But she kind of pointed me in a direction of some articles to start looking at that's talking about, well, you know, how effective is interactivity on an infographic? And are designers too hung up on the novelty of interaction, and they're sacrificing practices of good design principles? As she said, you know, if the design is bad, you're going to have a bad static infographic and you're going to have a bad interactive one. So because that all went down yesterday, I'm still kind of trying to sort things out. And
so that points you towards your literature review. Your literature review should not be citing articles about Trump or Clinton or the 2016 election, maybe even not about Twitter.
No. And so what I did last semester, and I kind of knew that this would change, obviously. No, my idea that I had in Dr. Stam's class, while the framework is still kind of the same, the direction that I'm going in has completely changed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it could be, I mean, if you wanted to do a test of your techniques and your understanding, go find another article that's about, I don't know, breeding rats in China or something, or, you know, has nothing to do with the campaign, just it has a data set that looks like this, a data table that looks like this, that you ingest into your Tableau and make something out of it using the same techniques. Then we begin to study the making of visualizations.
Okay.
But you don't have to do that. You could do just this one, and that would be fine. And this is a very...
Yeah, I think he should stick to this.
Yeah, no, just one. But, you know, don't necessarily layer it with additional ones unless you want to do different studies. But I think one would be fine.
So it's interesting that the comment you just made, Dr. Schneider, Tableau actually provides several sample data sets to play around with of all different natures. So, yeah, the other data sets are there to play around with.
Right.
You know, I want to emphasize too that in the end, you don't decide whether or not you have a thesis or not based on whether interactivity is better or useful. You basically do your study, you do your work, and and that's what your thesis is. And hopefully it is useful, more useful by doing interactivity, but you don't worry about it. You're just doing an objective scholarly study.
Yeah, I think like Dr. Schneider said, that would be kind of one facet of the lit review, is this debate between the pros and cons of interactivity. I think what he said earlier, how does this visualization in Tableau enhance the data set? How does it help tell a different story? I'm thinking that's the direction I probably should go in for the thesis.
Yeah, I think so. So just remember that when your final presentation comes forward, the first slide has the chart that we're looking at now.
Yeah. Okay.
This is where you're starting from. And then we want to see what you do with this and where you take it. That's your project.
Okay. Yeah. So then maybe I go back to the original idea of juxtaposing Clinton and Trump's sentiments, since they're right there on the table.
You might do 5 different things.
Oh yeah. This paper is chock full of raw data that when I read this, I was like, holy cow, this is a data gold mine. That's just, there's something I can do with this. I just had that feeling from when I first read it.
Yeah, so this is a beautiful table. It's great. You might not have exactly that table. You might, add the additional columns that they have in their other tables. So you have this big, and then say, okay, so great. I read this article and, but I'm a 2017 kind of reader. Show me the pictures. Don't show me this chart.
Yeah.
And so what you start here, and then where do you end up? And the movement from this to what you create, that's what you're making. And that would be and if it's if it has to be, if you think it should be interactive, fine. If you think it should be static, that's fine too. Maybe there's a couple of both, maybe you make 5 panels, 5 different things, and you say, this is good. This is what I did here. This is what this article suggested I do. So I followed those directions. This is not so good. We don't know exactly how many studies you're going to have or outputs, but it might just be 1, it might be 3, it might be 5. And, maybe you'll find different designers lead you to different ways to use Tableau, and you follow designer A, designer B, designer C. In the end, you let all the people who are paying attention to your thesis vote. And we all vote for designer. You know what I mean? So something like that. But, you come with you put different lenses onto this chart.
Yeah.
And that would be, and I'd stick in Tableau. I wouldn't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
I think Tableau is a good tool. I put a link to the Gapminder website as an example of another map visualization that I think Tableau should be able to do. But just as an example, so ignore the data, just look at the pretty picture, and maybe that's something you could look at as a possible thing to look at for your data.
Yeah, cool. Great. This is great, John.
Okay, is there, let me just copy these links down. Something here.
Is James still on?
Of course.
So when James posts the video, maybe he'll be so kind as to put the chat file in there as well.
I think I've got them right here.
Okay. But
So, Mike, is this what you were just directing me toward, these 3 links?
well, the first one I think is the one I put in there, but that's you already showed us that.
Oh, okay.
The Gapminder should be a link to Hans Rosling's. Hans, I believe, died, but the institution he founded was Gapminder, and so he was always trying to get people to post their databases and come up with new visualizations. And I just took a really quick look at their map visualization.
Okay.
So I thought it was kind of cool and similar to what you probably should be looking at.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you.
Great, John. I appreciate that. And I think your idea is a solid one. And what you're trying to do is reduce, clutter into something that's understandable. And I think that's your effort. I don't think, if you don't succeed, you don't succeed. But I think that's a valuable way to move forward.
I don't know how you could not succeed in a sense by the attempt is, we might disagree with whether or not you're successful, I guess, right? Is that what you're saying, Russ?
Yeah. I mean, do we learn something new? Maybe we don't. Maybe it's.
Maybe we do. Exactly. And
I think we will. But yeah, I tend to want to see the results. My point is, you're fine either way.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of people who are going to say, that chart is perfectly good. I get it.
Yeah.
So there's others for whom the pictures are just going to add confusion and take them too far away from the real data. But I think that you want to see if there's a visual audience. You want to see if somebody who's visually inclined learns more. And and some future student, I don't know if you wanted to do this. If you did want to do a study, you might find the college freshman and show half of them your visualization and half of them the chart and give them a quiz. I mean, that would be how you test learning. Again, I mean, you're not doing that, but that's how you would actually test to see whether there's different, right? You could actually test to see understanding.
Yeah.
But
it would depend on what you're testing, but sure.
Yeah.
And in effect, that's an important issue because you want something that is clearer about whatever it is you're going to test. So that's.
And next semester, when we have somebody who's interested in whether people learn from visual materials or tabular materials, we can point them to your thesis as a data set and they can use it because look, we have a visual and we have a chart. There's a thesis for somebody else, but not for you.
Yeah, I always
Yeah.
hope for things like that. It's never happened, but maybe.
No, it never does, but you never know.
I agree. No, I'm all for putting it out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to stop sharing at this point?
No, I think we're fine. Yeah, is there another one of us today, or are we
Yeah,
done?
Don's up. Don Conklin, I see your